In the vast expanse of the galaxy where 1,000 species trade, fight, and forge alliances among the stars, one truth was universally accepted. Humans were dangerous, not because of their technology, which was decent but unremarkable, not because of their military might, which was respectable but not overwhelming. Humans were dangerous because they had something no other species possessed: the ability to make you care about them, even when everything logical in your mind screamed that you shouldn't. Commander Zarathus of the Calarian Empire learned this the hard way. She had spent her entire military career studying human tactics, human psychology, human weaknesses. She had laughed with her fellow officers about human mating rituals, particularly their bizarre obsession with pressing their mouths together, an act so primitive and unhygienic that it became a running joke in the Calarian fleet. "Kiss a human," they would say when someone suggested something ridiculous, "because that's the only thing more impossible than what you just proposed." But when the Galactic Council's most crucial peace negotiations hung by a thread, and when humanity's newest diplomat arrived on her flagship with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 worlds, Zarathus discovered that some impossibilities have a way of becoming inevitable. And sometimes, the very thing you mock becomes the thing that saves not just your heart, but your entire civilization. This is the story of how a proud Calarian commander learned that the most dangerous human weapon isn't their stubbornness or their unpredictability. It's their capacity to love so fiercely that it transforms everyone around them. Even those who swore they could never be transformed, the crystalline halls of the Calarian flagship's sovereign's pride hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled war machine. Commander Zarathus stood before the massive viewport in her private quarters, her forearms crossed in a gesture that would have seemed impossible to most bipedal species, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace streak past. Her silver-blue skin caught the ambient light, creating patterns that shifted like liquid mercury across her tall, elegant frame. At 8 feet in height, she commanded respect through presence alone, but it was her mind that had earned her the youngest command position in Calarian military history. Her people were warriors by nature, bred for conquest and dominance, yet Zarathus had distinguished herself not just through combat prowess, but through strategic brilliance that had ended 3 separate conflicts before they could escalate into full-scale wars. Today, however, she felt the weight of a challenge unlike any she had faced before. "Commander," came the voice of her second-in-command, Lieutenant Catherine, through the communication array. "The human diplomatic vessel has just dropped out of hyperspace. They're requesting permission to dock." Zarathus turned from the viewport, her large, luminous eyes narrowing slightly. The Calarians had evolved on a world with 3 suns, giving them exceptional vision and eyes that appeared almost too large for their faces by human standards. Those same eyes now held a mixture of curiosity and distaste. "Humans," she muttered, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of her species. When Calarians spoke, their words seemed to resonate from multiple vocal chambers, creating an almost musical quality that could be hauntingly beautiful or terrifyingly authoritative depending on their mood. She had studied humanity extensively during her rise through the ranks. It was standard procedure for any Calarian officer who might encounter the strange bipedal species that had somehow managed to carve out a significant portion of space despite their obvious physical limitations: 2 arms, 2 legs, single-chambered hearts, and an average lifespan that barely reached a century. By every logical measure, they should have been extinct long ago. Instead, they had become one of the most influential species in the galaxy. "Permission granted," she said finally. "Have them escorted to Docking Bay 7. Do protocols." "Yes, Commander. Should I prepare the standard diplomatic reception?" Zarathus considered this. The standard diplomatic reception involved a formal honor guard, ceremonial weapons displays, and enough pomp and circumstance to intimidate most visiting dignitaries into compliance. It was psychological warfare disguised as hospitality, and it had served the Calarian Empire well for centuries. "No," she decided. "I'll meet with their representative in Conference Room Alpha. Minimal security presence. We want them comfortable enough to speak freely." There was a pause on the communication line. Lieutenant Catherine had served under Zarathus for 3 years. long enough to know that the commander rarely deviated from established protocols without good reason, but he also knew better than to question her decisions. Understood, Commander. The human vessel is beginning its approach now. As the connection closed, Zarates moved to her desk and activated the holographic display that contained everything the Calarian Empire knew about humanity. The information painted a picture of a species that defied easy categorization, physically weak but technologically adaptable, short-lived but capable of remarkable achievements, individually fragile but collectively resilient to a degree that bordered on the absurd. And then there were their social customs, particularly their mating rituals. Zarathus had attended several xenobiology seminars where human reproduction had been discussed with the clinical detachment of scientists studying an interesting but ultimately primitive species. The humans engaged in something called kissing, which involved pressing their mouth organs together and exchanging saliva. The very thought made her secondary stomach turn. Calarians reproduce through a complex biochemical process that involved the sharing of genetic essence through specialized glands in their palms. It was clean, efficient, and conducted with the proper reverence for the creation of new life. Human kissing, by contrast, seemed like something animals might do. She had once attended a gathering of junior officers where someone had suggested that kissing a human might be an effective form of psychological torture. The idea had been so absurd that it became a running joke throughout the fleet. "I'd rather kiss a human than take another shift in the reactor core," was a common complaint among engineering crews. The phrase had evolved into general usage as an expression of absolute impossibility. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Zarathus activated the communication array with a gesture, and the image of her intelligence officer, Major Vithkar, appeared in miniature above her desk. "Commander, we've received the personnel files for the human diplomatic team. There's something unusual about their primary negotiator." "Unusual how?" Major Vithkar's expression was difficult to read, which was saying something among a species whose faces were naturally more expressive than most. "His name is Dr. Marcus Chen. He's not a career diplomat. His background is in xenopsychology and conflict resolution. But more importantly, he's one of the humans who participated in the Zephyrian Reconciliation." Zarathus felt her interest sharpen. The Zephyrian Reconciliation was legendary throughout the galaxy, though the details remained classified by mutual agreement among all parties involved. What was known was that humanity had somehow managed to broker peace between two species that had been engaged in genocidal warfare for over 3 centuries. The Zephyrians and the Makari had hated each other with such intensity that most galactic observers assumed one or both species would eventually drive themselves to extinction. Instead, they were now close allies, trading partners, and according to some reports, had even begun interspecies cultural exchanges. The transformation had been so complete and so unexpected that it was studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy as an example of what was theoretically possible, even if no one could explain exactly how the humans had accomplished it. What was Dr. Chen's specific role in the reconciliation? Zarathus asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Major Vithkar replied. "According to our intelligence sources, he wasn't part of the official negotiating team. He was brought in as a consultant after the formal negotiations had completely broken down. Whatever he did it in less than a week. One human ended a 3-century war in a week? Apparently. And Commander, there's something else. Our deep cover operative in human space reports that Dr. Chen specifically requested this assignment. He volunteered to come to our sector when the Galactic Council put out the call for mediators. This was definitely unusual. The current crisis in Calarian space involved a 3-way territorial dispute between the Calarian Empire, the Threnody Confederation, and the newest addition to galactic politics, the Scorvani Collective. The Scorvani were a hive mind species that had recently achieved faster-than-light travel, and their expansion into previously unclaimed systems was creating tension with both the Calarians and the Threnody. Under normal circumstances, the Galactic Council would have assigned a team of experienced mediators from neutral species. the fact that humanity had volunteered, and that they were sending someone with Dr. Chen's unique qualifications suggested that they saw something in this situation that others might have missed. How long until the human delegation is ready for the initial meeting? Zarathus asked. Dr. Chen has requested 30 minutes to settle in and review the local situation files. He's asked to meet with you personally before the formal negotiations begin. Just me? Just you, Commander. He was quite specific about that. Zarathus considered this request. It was highly irregular for diplomatic first contact to involve a private meeting between commanders, but then again, everything about this situation seemed to be irregular. Perhaps that was intentional. Very well. Have him escorted to Conference Room Alpha in 35 minutes. I'll meet with him there. As Major Vithkar's image faded, Zarathus found herself genuinely curious about this human who had somehow ended an impossible war and now wanted to involve himself in Calarian affairs. She had met humans before, of course during various diplomatic functions and military exchanges, but always in formal settings where conversation was limited to official business. This would be her first opportunity to study one of them up close, to try to understand what it was about their species that allowed them to achieve such remarkable results despite their obvious physical limitations. Perhaps she could even gain some insight into their bizarre social customs and reproductive behaviors. 20 minutes later, as she made her way through the corridors toward Conference Room Alpha, Zarathus reflected on the irony of her situation. Where she was, one of the most respected military commanders in the Calarian Empire, about to meet with a member of a species she had spent years studying like a particularly interesting but ultimately inferior life form. Yet this same species had repeatedly demonstrated an ability to solve problems that had stymied much more advanced civilizations. Conference Room Alpha was located in the diplomatic section of the ship. The room could adjust its atmospheric composition, gravitational field, and lighting to match the needs of most known life forms. For this meeting, Zarathus had ordered it configured to standard galactic diplomatic settings, which would be comfortable for both Calarians and humans. She arrived precisely on schedule and took her position at the head of the conference table. The table itself was made from crystallized Calarian songstone, a material that resonated with harmonic frequencies and was considered both beautiful and spiritually significant to her people. It was also incredibly expensive and served as a subtle reminder of Calarian wealth and technological sophistication. The door chimed, and Lieutenant Kethrin's voice came through the communication system. "Commander, Dr. Chen is here to see you." "Send him in." The door slid open with a soft whisper of displaced air, and Zarathus got her first look at the human who had volunteered to solve their impossible problem. Dr. Marcus Chen was not what she had expected. Human males typically stood between 5 and 6 feet in height, making them significantly shorter than most galactic species. Dr. Chen appeared to be on the taller end of that range, but what struck Zarathus immediately was not his height, but his presence. He moved with a quiet confidence that reminded her of seasoned military officers. Yet there was something else there, something she couldn't quite identify. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, suggesting he was in the middle years of human lifespan. His eyes were brown, which she knew was a common coloration among his species, but there was an intensity to his gaze that was distinctly uncommon. When he looked at her, she had the strange sensation that he was seeing not just her physical form, but something deeper. "Commander Zarathus," he said, his voice carrying none of the nervous deference she typically expected from visiting diplomats. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me privately. I know it's unusual, but I thought it would be helpful if we could speak candidly before the formal negotiations begin." His pronunciation of her name was nearly perfect, which was remarkable since most non-Calarians struggled with the harmonic elements of their language. Either he had studied extensively or he had an exceptional ear for linguistic nuances. "Dr. Chen," she replied, gesturing for him to take a seat across from her. "I confess I am curious about your request for this private meeting. In my experience, human diplomats prefer the safety of formal protocols. I'm not exactly a typical diplomat," he said with what humans called a smile. Zarathus had studied human facial expressions extensively, but seeing one in person was different than examining them in instructional materials. The smile seemed genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that suggested actual pleasure rather than mere social politeness. "So I understand. Your work with the Zephyrian reconciliation has become something of a legend in diplomatic circles." "Has it?" He seemed genuinely surprised by this. "I suppose news travels fast in a galaxy this connected, though I should point out that I didn't end that war by myself. The Zephyrians and Makari ended it. I just helped them remember why they wanted to." This was an interesting perspective. Most species took credit for their diplomatic successes, often exaggerating their roles in the process. Dr. Chen's apparent modesty was either genuine humility or a very sophisticated form of psychological manipulation. "And what makes you think you can help us remember why we want peace?" Zarathus asked. "Because I don't think this is really about territorial disputes or resource allocation," Dr. Chen replied, leaning forward slightly. "I've read the files, studied the history, analyzed the political dynamics. This conflict has all the hallmarks of a contact anxiety response." Zarathus felt her secondary eyes narrow. Contact anxiety was a psychological phenomenon that occurred when species encountered others with fundamentally different social structures or biological imperatives. It often manifested as territorial disputes or trade conflicts, but the underlying cause was fear of contamination or change. "You believe we're afraid of the Scorvani?" "I believe everyone is afraid of the Scorvani," Dr. Chen said quietly. "A hive mind species represents something completely outside the experience of individual consciousness races. Their very existence challenges basic assumptions about identity, autonomy, and what it means to be alive. The Threnodidae are responding with aggressive expansion to prove they can't be absorbed. The Calarians are responding with military positioning to demonstrate strength. And the Scorvani are probably responding to everyone else's fear with their own defensive measures." It was an astute analysis, and Zarathus found herself reassessing her initial impression of the human diplomat. He had identified the core psychological dynamic driving the conflict with remarkable precision. "Even if your analysis is correct, how do you propose to address such fundamental fears?" "The same way I always do," Dr. Chen replied, "by helping everyone involved remember that fear is just another name for something we haven't understood yet. And once we understand something, it stops being frightening and starts being interesting." There was something in the way he said this that made Zarathus think he was speaking from personal experience. She found herself wondering what fears Dr. Marcus Chen had overcome in his own life and how those experiences had shaped his approach to resolving conflicts. "Commander," he continued, "may I ask you a personal question?" "That depends on the question. What do you think of human mating customs?" The question was so unexpected that Zarathus actually leaned back in her chair. In all her years of diplomatic experience, no one had ever asked such a direct question about species-specific social behaviors. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance of that question to our current situation." "Humor me, Dr. Chen said, and again she saw that strange smile. "I promise it will make sense." Zarathus considered how to respond. She could deflect the question, redirect the conversation back to official business, or simply refuse to answer. But something about Dr. Chen's demeanor suggested that this wasn't idle curiosity or an attempt to embarrass her. "If you must know," she said finally, "I find them primitive and unhygienic. The practice of pressing mouth organs together and exchanging saliva seems like something lower life forms might engage in." "Ah," Dr. Chen said, and his smile widened. "You're talking about kissing." "Yes, that's the word. It has become something of a joke among my people. We use the phrase, 'I'd rather kiss a human,' to describe things that are impossibly unpleasant." To her surprise, Dr. Chen laughed, not the polite, diplomatic chuckle she might have expected, but genuine, warm laughter that seemed to fill the conference room with an almost musical quality. "That's wonderful," he said once his laughter subsided. "Do you know what kissing actually is, from a human perspective? I was under the impression it was a precursor to mating behavior. It can be, but that's not what it's really about. Kissing is how humans share breath, share life essence, share the most intimate part of themselves with another being. When humans kiss, we're not just exchanging saliva. We're saying, I trust you enough to share the air from my lungs, the moisture from my mouth, the bacteria and chemicals and microscopic pieces of myself. It's the most profound act of vulnerability and trust in human culture." Zarathus stared at him, her mind reprocessing everything she thought she knew about human mating rituals. Viewed from this perspective, kissing wasn't primitive at all. It was actually remarkably sophisticated, a biological and emotional intimacy that required complete trust between participants. "But why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because, Doc," Chen said, leaning back in his chair, "in about 6 hours, representatives from 3 species who fundamentally don't understand each other are going to sit down at a negotiating table and try to solve a conflict that exists primarily because each group is afraid the others are too alien to trust. And if we're going to make any progress, we need to start by acknowledging that the things that seem strange or frightening about each other might actually be beautiful, once we understand them properly." Zarathus felt something shift in her perception of the human sitting across from her. Dr. Marcus Chen wasn't just a diplomat or a conflict resolution specialist. He was someone who understood that the greatest barriers to peace weren't political or economic, but psychological and cultural. "You think you can teach us to understand each other in 6 hours? I think," Dr. Chen said softly, "that understanding doesn't take nearly as long as most people believe. But it does require courage. The courage to admit that what we fear might be worth learning about instead." As he spoke, Zarathus found herself studying his face more carefully, noting the way his eyes seemed to reflect light differently than she had expected, the way his mouth moved when he formed words, the subtle expressions that played across his features. For the first time, she was seeing a human not as an object of study, but as an individual being with thoughts and feelings as complex as her own. And for the first time in her military career, Commander Zaratheus of the Calarian Empire began to wonder what it might actually be like to trust someone that completely. The main conference hall of the Sovereign's Pride had been transformed into a neutral diplomatic space, its walls displaying the flags and emblems of 3 very different civilizations. The Calarian Empire's banner hung with proud authority, its crystalline threads catching and reflecting light in patterns that seemed to shift and dance. Beside it, the Threnody Confederation's symbol writhed with the organic curves and flowing lines that characterized their bio-architectural aesthetic. And finally, most unusual of all, the Scorvani Collective's emblem, a perfect geometric pattern that seemed to pulse with its own inner rhythm, representing the unified consciousness of billions of individual minds. Zarathus stood at attention near the head of the massive conference table, watching as the various delegations took their positions. The 2 hours that had passed since her private conversation with Dr. Chen felt both infinite and instantaneous. She found herself replaying their discussion, particularly his explanation of human kissing, and wondering why that single insight had affected her so profoundly. The Threnody delegation arrived first, as was their custom. Baster Kithallo moved with the fluid grace characteristic of her people, her movements so smooth they almost seemed like a form of dance. The Threnody had evolved in low-gravity environments, giving them elongated limbs and an almost ethereal quality that many species found either beautiful or unsettling. Their skin had a translucent quality that allowed the flow of their circulatory system to be visible beneath the surface, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted with their emotional states. Commander Zarathus, Ambassador Kythallo said, her voice carrying the musical tones that made Threnady's speech sound like singing. "It has been too long since our peoples have gathered in peaceful discourse. Indeed, Ambassador, I hope today's discussions will prove more fruitful than our previous exchanges. The diplomatic pleasantries were interrupted by a sound that made everyone in the room pause. It was a low, harmonic vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves, growing gradually stronger until the entire ship seemed to resonate with it. The Scorvani delegation had arrived. Zarathus had never seen a Scorvani in person before, and she found the experience deeply unsettling. The three beings that entered the conference hall moved in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly, their heads turning at precisely the same angles, their breathing occurring in identical rhythms. They were humanoid in basic structure, but their skin had a metallic quality that reflected light in strange ways, and their eyes were completely black, showing no iris or pupil. Most disturbing of all was the way they spoke. When the center figure opened its mouth, all three voices emerged simultaneously, creating a harmony that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "We greet the individual consciousnesses gathered here," they said, the words seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We are voice of the collective in this place. We speak for all Scorvani who are—" Dr. Chen entered the room during this introduction, and Zarathus was surprised to notice that he showed no visible reaction to the Scorvani's unsettling presence. He simply nodded respectfully to each delegation and took his position at the neutral space, marked for the mediator. "Thank you all for agreeing to participate in these discussions," he began, his voice carrying easily through the large chamber despite speaking at normal conversational volume. "Before we begin addressing the specific territorial and resource issues that have brought us together, I think it would be helpful if we acknowledge the real challenge we're facing here." Ambassador Kithalo's skin pattern shifted to a cooler blue spectrum. "And what challenge is that, Dr. Chen? We're three species trying to coexist in a galaxy where each of us represents something completely unprecedented to the others. The Calarians have built a civilization based on individual excellence and hierarchical achievement. The Threnody have created a society that emphasizes collective harmony and organic growth. And the Scorvani embody a form of consciousness that most individual mind species can barely comprehend." The Scorvani's three bodies turned their heads in unison toward Dr. Chen. "You speak of consciousness as if it were a choice rather than a biological imperative. Isn't it both?" Dr. Chen asked. "Every day, each of us chooses how to express the consciousness we were born with. Calarians choose whether to pursue honor or merely success. Threnody choose whether to seek harmony or merely compliance. And the Scorvani, if I understand correctly, choose how to balance the needs of the collective with the experiences of individual components." This was a remarkably sophisticated understanding of Scorvani psychology. Zarathus had read intelligence reports suggesting that the hive mind species did maintain some level of individual identity within their collective structure, but it was considered classified information known only to high-level military analysts. "You have studied us extensively," the Scorvani acknowledged. "This is unexpected from an individual consciousness species." "I've studied all of you extensively," Dr. Chen replied, "because I've learned that conflict usually arises not from incompatible interests, but from incomplete understanding. Ambassador Kithalo, may I ask you a personal question?" The Threnody delegation leader's skin patterns shifted again, this time to a warmer yellow hue that indicated openness. "Of course. What is your people's greatest fear about the Scorvani expansion?" Ambassador Kithalo was silent for several moments, her skin cycling through various color patterns as she considered her response. "If you must know, we fear absorption. The idea that our individual thoughts, our personal connections, our unique perspectives could be subsumed into a larger collective consciousness. We fear losing what makes us, us." "And Commander Zarathus," Dr. Chen continued, turning to her, "what is the Calarian Empire's greatest concern about this situation?" Zarathus felt the weight of three species' attention focused on her. The diplomatic answer would be to cite territorial integrity or resource allocation concerns. But something about Dr. Chen's direct approach encouraged honesty. "We fear obsolescence," she said finally. "Calarian society is built on the principle that individuals can achieve greatness through determination and excellence. But if consciousness itself can be optimized through collective integration, what value do individual achievements have? What place is there for a species that defines itself through personal honor in a galaxy where the collective mind might be simply better?" The Scorvani delegation's synchronized breathing seemed to pause for a moment before they responded. "You believe we seek to prove our superiority through expansion, don't you?" Ambassador Kithalo asked, her skin patterns now showing the deep red of challenge. "We seek to understand," the Scorvani replied. "Each new system we explore, each new species we encounter, each new environment we experience adds to our collective knowledge. But understanding does not require absorption. We do not seek to make you like us. We seek to learn what it means to be you." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "And what have you learned about individual consciousness that surprises you?" The three Scorvani figures tilted their heads in unison, a gesture that somehow managed to convey contemplation despite their alien features. "We have learned that individual consciousness creates loneliness. This concept was unknown to us before contact with single-mind species. The idea that a being could feel isolated, even when surrounded by others, was incomprehensible. Yet we observe that this loneliness drives individual consciousness species to remarkable achievements. They create art, music, literature, and bonds of friendship and love that serve no practical purpose except to bridge the gap between separate minds." "And you find this interesting rather than inferior?" Zarathus asked. "We find it beautiful," the Scorvani replied, and for the first time, their synchronized voices carried what sounded almost like emotion. "To choose to connect with another being despite the fundamental barriers between separate consciousnesses requires a form of courage that the collective does not possess. We do not experience loneliness, but we also do not experience the joy of overcoming it." The room fell silent as this revelation settled over the assembled representatives. Zarathus found herself looking at the Scorvani with entirely new eyes. Instead of seeing them as a potential threat to individual identity, she was beginning to understand them as beings who were genuinely fascinated by the very thing they couldn't directly experience. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Kithalo, said softly, her skin now showing the gentle green of thoughtfulness. "You have a gift for helping us see each other more clearly, but insight alone doesn't solve territorial disputes or resource allocation conflicts." "Actually," Dr. Chen replied, "I think it does." "Commander Zarathus, what if I told you that the Scorvani expansion isn't random, that they're specifically seeking contact with species that demonstrate what they call connection courage, the ability to form meaningful bonds despite fundamental differences?" Zarathus considered this. "You're saying their expansion into our sectors is deliberate? That they're choosing to make contact with the Calarians and Threnody specifically?" The Scorvani delegation exchanged what might have been glances, though with their completely black eyes it was difficult to be certain. "Dr. Chen's assessment is accurate. We have observed both your species from a distance and found your social dynamics worthy of closer study. The Calarian dedication to individual excellence and the Threnody mastery of collective harmony while maintaining individual identity represent forms of consciousness that fascinate us." "So this isn't about territory at all," Ambassador Kithalo said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Not primarily," the Scorvani confirmed, "though we do require physical space for our explorations and research. We had hoped that coexistence might be possible, but we understand that our presence creates anxiety among individual consciousness species." Dr. Chen stood and moved to the large holographic display that dominated one wall of the conference room. With a gesture, he activated a three-dimensional map of the disputed sectors. "What if we approach this differently? Instead of dividing territory, what if we created shared research zones? Areas where all three species could study and learn from each other under controlled conditions? You're proposing scientific collaboration rather than territorial division," Zarathus said, her strategic mind immediately beginning to analyze the possibilities. I'm proposing that we acknowledge what's really happening here. The Scorvani want to understand individual consciousness. The Calarians want to prove that individual achievement remains valuable in a galaxy of collectives. The Threnodai want to demonstrate that harmony and individuality can coexist. These aren't contradictory goals, they're complementary ones. Ambassador Kithalo's skin patterns had shifted to a brilliant gold, indicating excitement. A collaborative research initiative would allow us to study Scorvani collective consciousness while demonstrating our own social achievements. And it would allow the Calarian Empire to showcase our technological and military capabilities in a peacekeeping and scientific context, Zarathest added, feeling genuine enthusiasm for the idea. Most importantly, the Scorvani said, it would allow us to study the phenomenon of interspecies cooperation itself. We have observed that individual consciousness species can sometimes achieve collective goals without sacrificing individual identity. This paradox interests us greatly. Dr. Chen returned to his seat, but Zarathus noticed that his posture had relaxed significantly. The beautiful thing about this approach is that everyone gets what they actually want, rather than what they thought they wanted. The Scorvani get close contact study opportunities. The Threnodi get to prove their harmony model works on an interspecies level. The Calarians get to demonstrate their leadership in a complex collaborative environment. But the practical details, Ambassador Kithalo began, are complex but not impossible, Zarathus interrupted, her mind already working through the logistics. We could establish rotating research stations, joint exploration missions, cultural exchange programs. The military applications alone would be fascinating. Imagine Calarian strategic thinking combined with Threnody organic planning and Scorvani collective information processing. The Scorvani delegation leaned forward in unison. You would be willing to share military knowledge in a controlled research environment for the advancement of galactic understanding? It would be an honor, Zarathus replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it completely. Dr. Chen was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Commander, you've just demonstrated something remarkable. You've moved from seeing the Scorvani as a threat to your way of life to seeing them as potential collaborators in advancing your way of life. It's not that different from what you did with the Zephyrians and Mokari, is it? She asked. Actually, it's much more sophisticated. The Zephyrians and Mokari were at least similar species with comparable consciousness structures. What you're proposing is collaboration between fundamentally different forms of consciousness itself. Ambassador Kithalo stood and moved to the holographic display, her movements flowing like water as she studied the territorial map. Dr. Head Teddy, Chen, I have to ask, how do you know this will work? How can you be so confident that three species with such different ways of thinking can actually work together? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quality that Zarathus was beginning to recognize as deeply personal. Because I've learned that the things that make us different are often the things that make us valuable to each other. The Scorvani's collective consciousness gives them perspectives that individual minds can't achieve. Calarian individual excellence pushes boundaries that collective thinking might consider too risky. Threnodai harmony creates stability that pure competition or pure cooperation alone cannot. But how do you know we can trust each other enough to make it work? The Scorvani asked. Because, Dr. Chen replied, looking directly at Zarathus, trust isn't about eliminating differences. It's about valuing them enough to take risks. And risk-taking, whether it's Calarian courage in battle, Threnodai courage in change, or Scorvani courage in exploration, is something all three of your species understand perfectly. Zarathus felt something shift in her understanding, not just of the current situation, but of Dr. Chen himself. He wasn't just mediating a conflict. He was teaching them to see strength in what they had perceived as weakness, beauty in what they had feared as alien. Dr. Chen, she said slowly, when you talked about human kissing earlier, about sharing breath and trust, you weren't just explaining human customs, were you? He met her eyes directly, and she saw something in his expression that made her secondary hearts skip a beat. "No, Commander. I was explaining what all meaningful relationships require, regardless of species, the courage to share the most essential parts of ourselves with someone fundamentally different from us." As the implications of this statement settled over the room, Zarathus realized that somewhere in the course of these discussions, her understanding of humans in general and Dr. Marcus Chen in particular had undergone a complete transformation. And for the first time in her military career, she found herself wondering what it might be like to trust someone that completely, not just professionally, but personally. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it was becoming increasingly intriguing. 3 days had passed since the initial breakthrough in negotiations, and the Sovereign's pride had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. A floating laboratory of interspecies cooperation. The ship's corridors now hummed with the combined languages of 3 different civilizations as joint working groups hammered out the practical details of what Dr. Chen had dubbed the Consciousness Collaboration Initiative. Zarathus found herself spending more time than she had anticipated working directly with the human diplomat. What had begun as professional necessity had evolved into something she couldn't quite categorize. Dr. Chen had a way of asking questions that forced her to examine assumptions she hadn't even realized she held, and his insights into the psychological dynamics between species were reshaping her understanding of diplomacy itself. This morning, she was reviewing preliminary resource allocation proposals in her ready room when the door chimed, "Enter!" She called, expecting one of her officers with a routine report. Instead, Dr. Chen stepped through the doorway carrying what appeared to be a steaming cup of some kind of beverage. "Good morning, Commander. I hope I'm not interrupting anything urgent." "Not at all. Please sit." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting that he moved with the same quiet confidence she had observed during their first meeting. "What brings you to see me?" "Coffee," he said, holding up the cup with that characteristic human smile. "Or rather, I wanted to share something with you that might seem as strange to you as kissing did when we first discussed it." Zarathus felt her curiosity spike. Over the past 3 days, Dr. Chen had demonstrated an remarkable talent for using seemingly simple concepts to illuminate complex truths. "I'm listening. Humans have a custom called sharing coffee," he began, settling into the chair with easy grace. "It's not a formal ritual or ceremony. It's something we do when we want to have meaningful conversations with someone we respect. The coffee itself isn't really the point. It's the act of sitting together, sharing time, creating a space where both people can speak honestly. And you brought coffee to share with me? I brought coffee to offer to you," he corrected gently. "Sharing would require both of us to drink from the same cup, which I suspect would trigger the same hygiene concerns you have about kissing. But offering someone coffee, inviting them to share time and conversation while we both drink our own beverages, is one of the most fundamental ways humans express friendship and respect." Zarathus studied the cup in his hands. The liquid inside was dark brown, almost black, and steam rose from it in delicate spirals that caught the ambient lighting. "What does it taste like?" "Bitter, mostly. A little sweet if you add sugar. It contains a stimulant that helps humans stay alert and focused." But honestly, most humans don't drink coffee because they enjoy the taste. We drink it because of what it represents, taking time out of our day to be present with someone else. The idea was foreign, yet oddly appealing. Calarians had their own social rituals involving shared consumption, but they tended to be formal affairs with specific protocols and ceremonial significance. The concept of an informal gesture that expressed friendship and respect without requiring elaborate preparation was intriguing. "Doc Chen," she said carefully, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. In your private meeting with Ambassador Kithalo yesterday and your session with the Scorvani the day before, did you share coffee with them as well?" His expression shifted in a way she was learning to recognize as genuine pleasure. "No, actually. The Threnodidae don't have compatible digestive systems for human beverages, so I shared what they call harmony time instead." a period of synchronized breathing that they use for important conversations. With the Scorvani, I participated in what they call knowledge pooling, where they temporarily shared some of their collective sensory input with me. You experienced collective consciousness? Zarathes felt a chill of something that might have been fear or fascination. Briefly, it was overwhelming but beautiful. Imagine suddenly being aware of everything that thousands of minds are thinking simultaneously. All the connections and patterns and insights that emerge when consciousness operates at that scale. It was like seeing the universe from a completely different perspective. Weren't you afraid of losing yourself in it? Terrified, Dr. Chen admitted. But that's exactly why I needed to experience it. The Scorvani can't understand individual consciousness from the inside, just like we can't really understand collective consciousness from the outside. But they were willing to share their experience with me, and I was willing to trust them to let me return to my individual awareness afterward. Zarathis found herself staring at this human who spoke so casually about willingly risking his individual identity for the sake of understanding. Dr. Chen, what you're describing, it goes far beyond professional diplomacy. You're not just mediating between our species, you're immersing yourself in our ways of being. Yes, he said simply. How else can I help species understand each other if I don't understand them myself? But why? What drives you to take such personal risks for the sake of diplomatic success? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, as if drawing warmth from it. When he spoke, his voice carried a quality she hadn't heard before, something vulnerable and deeply personal. 3 years ago, I lost someone very important to me, my wife, Sarah. She died in an accident during a first contact mission to the Outer Rim. She was a xenobiologist, one of the most brilliant people I've ever known, and she believed that understanding between species was the key to preventing the kind of wars that destroy entire civilizations. Zarathis felt something tighten in her chest at the grief she heard in his voice. Among her people, the loss of a bonded partner was considered one of the most profound tragedies possible. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, and was surprised by how inadequate the words felt. Thank you. The point is, Sarah taught me that real understanding requires real risk. You can't truly know someone, whether they're an individual from your own species or a representative of a completely alien civilization, unless you're willing to make yourself vulnerable to them, unless you're willing to let them change you. Is that why you chose to work in diplomacy? I chose diplomacy because Sarah believed that every species has something unique to contribute to the galaxy, and that our differences are what make us stronger together than we could ever be apart. Every time I help species understand each other, every time I see former enemies become collaborators, I feel like I'm honoring her memory and continuing her work. The honesty in his voice was almost overwhelming. Zarathes had spent her entire career surrounded by military personnel who prized emotional control and strategic thinking above personal revelation. Dr. Tommen, Chen's willingness to share such intimate details about his motivations was both admirable and deeply unsettling. Dr. Pen, she said slowly, when you offered to share coffee with me, were you offering friendship? I was offering the possibility of friendship, he replied. Real friendship requires time and mutual understanding, but it has to start somewhere. Zarathis considered this. In Calarian culture, friendship was earned through demonstrated loyalty and shared accomplishments. The idea that it could begin with a simple gesture of trust and openness was foreign but appealing. I don't drink coffee, she said finally, but Calarians have something called Thesvar, a warm beverage made from crystallized minerals and herbs that we share during important conversations. Would you be willing to try it? Dr. Chen's smile was radiant. I would be honored. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in Zarathis' private dining area, each with a steaming cup of the traditional Calarian beverage. The Thesvar had a complex flavor that was part mineral, part herbal, and parts something uniquely Calarian that had no equivalent in human experience. Dr. Chen had taken his first sip cautiously, then with obvious appreciation. "It's like drinking starlight," he said, which was such a poetic description that Zara Tess found herself laughing, a sound that rang through her quarters like crystal chimes. "That's not a bad description, actually. The crystals we use are formed in the cores of dying stars, and Calarians believe that drinking Thesisvar connects us to the cosmic forces that shaped our existence. Do you believe that?" "I believe that sharing Thesisvar with someone is an act of trust and respect," she replied. "Whether or not it actually connects us to cosmic forces is less important than the fact that it connects us to each other." Dr. Chen raised his cup in a gesture she recognized as a human toast. "To connection, then, and to the courage it takes to trust someone different from ourselves." Zaroth raised her own cup, and as they drank together she felt something shift in their relationship. This was no longer just professional collaboration or diplomatic necessity. This was the beginning of genuine friendship with a being whose approach to life was reshaping her understanding of what friendship could mean. "Dr. Chen," she said as they finished their drinks, "may I ask you something that might seem inappropriate? After everything we've shared, I can't imagine anything you could ask that would be inappropriate. The other night, when you were explaining human kissing, you said it was about sharing breath and trust. Have you kissed someone since your wife died?" The question seemed to surprise him, and for a moment his careful diplomatic composure slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "No," he said quietly, "I haven't. Sarah she was everything to me. The idea of sharing that kind of intimacy with someone else feels like betraying her memory. Even though she's gone? Even though she's gone. I know it doesn't make logical sense, but grief isn't logical. Love isn't logical." Zarathus found herself studying his face as he spoke, noting the way his expression changed when he talked about his wife, the way his voice softened with remembered affection and current loss. For the first time, she was seeing him not as the brilliant diplomat who had solved impossible conflicts, but as a person who was still struggling with his own impossible conflict between honoring the past and remaining open to the future. "Dr. Chen," she said gently, "may I share something with you about Calarian bonding customs?" He looked up at her with curious interest. "Please, when Calarians lose a bonded partner, we have a ritual called Fescalar, the opening of paths. It's based on the belief that love doesn't diminish when it's shared with multiple people. Instead, it grows. The love we had for our lost partner becomes the foundation that allows us to love others more deeply, not less." That's a beautiful philosophy. It's more than philosophy. It's practical wisdom. The capacity to love that Sarah awakened in you doesn't belong to her. It belongs to you. Honoring her memory doesn't require keeping that capacity locked away. It requires using it to create the kind of connections and understanding she believed in. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing the rim of his empty cup. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes held an expression she hadn't seen before, something that might have been hope struggling against fear. "Commander," he said, "why do I get the feeling that this conversation isn't really about Calarian bonding customs?" Zarathus felt her heart's racing in a pattern she recognized but had never experienced quite this intensely. "Because perhaps it isn't," she admitted. "Perhaps it's about the fact that over the past 3 days, I've come to care about you in ways that go far beyond professional collaboration. And perhaps it's about the fact that you've taught me to see beauty in differences, including the difference between friendship and something more." The silence that followed felt charged with possibilities neither of them had expected when they first sat down to share beverages and conversation. Dr. Chen was looking at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and exhilarated at the same time. "Zarathus," he said, using her given name for the first time, "are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I would very much like to know what it feels like to trust someone the way humans trust each other when they share breath and life essence. I'm saying that the idea of kissing a human no longer seems impossible or unpleasant. I'm saying that the idea of kissing you, specifically, has become something I find myself thinking about far more than a Calarian military commander probably should. Dr. Chen stood up from his chair and moved around the table until he was standing beside her. When she looked up at him, she saw her own mixture of fear and desire reflected in his eyes. "Zarathis," he said softly, "if we do this, everything changes. Not just between us, but potentially between our species. Are you prepared for that kind of responsibility?" "I'm prepared for anything," she replied, rising to stand before him, "as long as we face it together." And as Dr. Marcus Chen reached up to gently touch her face, preparing to share with her the most intimate human expression of trust and affection, Zarathis realized that she had never been more afraid or more certain of anything in her entire life. The moment lasted forever, and no time at all. Dr. Marcus Chen's hand was warm against Zarathis's cheek, his touch gentle despite the strength she could sense in his fingers. Her skin, normally cool to the touch of most species, seemed to warm under his caress, and she could feel her natural bioluminescent patterns beginning to glow softly beneath the surface. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Zarathis placed one of her 4 hands over his, holding it against her face. With another hand, she reached up to touch his cheek, marveling at the warmth and texture of human skin. It was softer than she had expected, with a subtle roughness that spoke of a life lived outdoors under alien suns. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said, her harmonic voice creating resonances in the small space between them. "But Marcus, I don't know how to do this. Kellerian bonding is very different from human intimacy. We'll figure it out together," he replied, and she could see the truth of it in his eyes. This wasn't just about physical attraction or even emotional connection. This was about 2 beings from different worlds choosing to bridge the gap between their species through the most fundamental act of trust either of them could offer. When their lips met, Zarathis understood for the first time why humans considered kissing sacred. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The warmth of his breath mingled with hers, and she could taste something uniquely human, complex and slightly sweet, with undertones that spoke of coffee and something else she couldn't identify but found intoxicating. But more than the physical sensations was the emotional intimacy of it. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest, feel the slight tremor in his hands that told her he was as nervous as she was, feel the way he held himself back even as he surrendered to the moment. This was vulnerability made physical. This was trust given form. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing heavily. Zarathis's skin was now glowing noticeably, patterns of blue and silver light cascading across her features in waves that matched her emotional state. Marcus stared at her in wonder. "You're beautiful," he said, and she could hear the awe in his voice. "I've seen Calarian bioluminescence in diplomatic contexts, but this is something entirely different. This is what happens when we feel deeply," she explained, her voice softer than usual. "Our emotions literally light us up from within. It's one reason why Calarians find it difficult to lie or hide our feelings. So right now, anyone who saw you would know exactly how you're feeling?" Zarathis felt her skin patterns shift to deeper blues and purples, colors that indicated both contentment and desire. "Right now, anyone who saw me would know that I've just experienced something that has changed me fundamentally. They would know that I found something precious and terrifying and wonderful, all at the same time." Marcus reached up to trace one of the glowing patterns on her shoulder with his fingertip, and she shivered at the contact. "Zarathis, what we just did, it's going to complicate everything, isn't it?" "Probably," she admitted. "Interspecies relationships are rare enough to cause comment. A relationship between a Calarian military commander and a human diplomat in the middle of complex negotiations, that could be seen as everything from a security breach to a political statement. Do you regret it?" She considered the question seriously, weighing all the potential consequences against the simple truth of what she had just experienced. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to understand what I was missing. Marcus, when you kissed me, I felt something I've never felt before. Not just attraction or affection, but a sense of completeness I didn't know was possible." "I felt it too," he admitted, "and it scares me, because I thought that part of my life was over when Sarah died. I thought I would never feel that kind of connection again." "But you do feel it?" "I do, which means I need to tell you something important." Marcus took a step back, giving them both some space, though his eyes never left hers. "When I volunteered for this mission, it wasn't just because I believed I could help resolve the conflict. It was because I knew it would force me to confront my own fears about moving forward with my life. I've been hiding behind grief for 3 years, using Sarah's memory as an excuse to avoid the risk of caring about someone new." Zarathus felt something shift in her understanding of the man standing before her. "You came here knowing you might fall in love? I came here hoping I might remember what it felt like to be alive instead of just functional," he replied. "I never imagined it would happen like this with someone like you. But Zarathus, I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't about replacing Sarah or moving on from her. It's about discovering that love isn't a finite resource. The heart doesn't run out of room for new connections just because it's been broken before." The words resonated with everything she had told him about Calarian bonding philosophy, but hearing him express it in his own terms made her realize how universal the truth was. Love didn't diminish when shared. It expanded. "Marcus," she said, reaching for his hands with 2 of hers, "I need to tell you something as well. What just happened between us isn't just personal. In Calarian culture, kissing someone, sharing breath and life essence the way humans do, is considered a form of thescaral, soul bonding. By our customs, we've just declared ourselves committed to each other in the most fundamental way possible." Marcus's eyes widened. "You're saying that by kissing you, I've accidentally married you according to Calarian law? Not married, exactly. But bonded, yes. It's a deeper connection than human marriage, but less formal than Calarian legal partnership. It means we're committed to each other's well-being and growth, that we've chosen to interweave our lives in significant ways." "And you're okay with that? Even though I didn't know what it meant when I kissed you?" Zarathus felt her bioluminescent pattern shift to the warm gold of deep happiness. "I'm more than okay with it. I'm grateful for it. Because it means that what we just shared wasn't just a moment of attraction or curiosity. It was the beginning of something real and lasting." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Zarathus's communication system. She moved to answer it, and Lieutenant Catherine's voice filled the room. "Commander, sorry to disturb you, but we have a situation developing that requires your immediate attention." "What kind of situation?" Zarathus asked, her mind automatically shifting into command mode even as her skin continued to glow with residual emotions. "The Scorvani have requested an emergency meeting with all delegation heads. They're saying something about observing unprecedented consciousness integration patterns and needing to discuss the implications for the collaboration agreement." Zarathus felt a chill of apprehension. "Do they know about?" "I don't know what they know, Commander, but they've specifically requested that Dr. Chen be present for the meeting as well." Marcus and Zarathus exchanged glances. The Scorvani collective consciousness was capable of perceiving things that individual minds might miss, particularly when it came to emotional and psychological connections between beings. "Tell them we'll be there in 15 minutes, Zarathus said. "Yes, Commander." As the communication closed, Marcus ran his hands through his hair. "Well, that's either very good timing or very bad timing. With the Scorvani, it's probably intentional timing," Zarathus replied. "Their collective consciousness picks up on pattern changes that individual minds don't notice. If they detected something different about our interaction, then they know what happened between us. They know something happened. The question is whether they see it as a positive development or a complication. As they prepared to leave Zarates's quarters, she caught sight of herself in the reflective surface of her viewport. Her bioluminescent patterns were still active, creating a soft aurora of light across her skin. Anyone who saw her would immediately know she was experiencing powerful emotions. "Marcus," she said, turning to face him one more time before they left the privacy of her quarters, "whatever happens in this meeting, whatever the political or diplomatic consequences of our relationship might be, I want you to know that I don't regret what we shared, and I don't want you to regret it either." "I couldn't regret it if I tried," he replied, reaching out to touch her hand briefly. "Zarathes, what we just discovered together, it's bigger than diplomacy or politics or even the collaboration agreement. It's proof that the barriers between species aren't as insurmountable as we think they are. And if the others see it that way, then maybe what we just did isn't just about us. Maybe it's about showing three species that trust and connection are possible even across the most fundamental differences." As they left her quarters and made their way through the corridors of the Sovereign's Pride, Zarathes found herself hoping that Marcus was right. Because if the Scorvani had indeed detected their emotional connection, if the other delegations were about to learn about the unprecedented bond that had formed between a Calarian commander and a human diplomat, then the next few hours would determine not just the fate of their relationship, but potentially the future of interspecies cooperation itself. The corridors seemed longer than usual as they walked toward the conference room, and Zarathes was acutely aware of the way her skin continued to pulse with gentle light, advertising her emotional state to anyone who might see her. But instead of feeling embarrassed or concerned, she felt proud. Let them see, she thought. Let them know that something beautiful has happened here. Because what she and Marcus had shared wasn't just a personal revelation, it was proof that the impossible could become inevitable when two beings chose courage over fear, connection over separation, love over the safety of emotional distance. And if that wasn't worth fighting for, nothing was. As they approached the conference room doors, Marcus reached over and took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that was both human and universal. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we face it together." Together, Zarathes agreed, and stepped forward to discover what consequences their moment of impossible courage would bring. The conference room fell into complete silence as Zarathes and Marcus entered together. Ambassador Kithalo's skin immediately shifted to the deep purple of profound surprise, while her delegation members began the subtle harmonic humming that indicated intense curiosity among the Threnodi. The Scorvani delegation, as always, was harder to read, but their synchronized breathing seemed to have accelerated slightly. More telling than any of these reactions, however, was the way the room's atmospheric processors had been adjusted. The lighting was softer, the temperature warmer, and the air circulation had been modified to create gentle currents that carried the sense of all three species' homeworlds. It was an environment designed for comfort and honesty, not formal diplomacy. "Commander Zarathes, Dr. Chen," the Scorvani spoke in their synchronized harmony, "we are grateful that you have joined us so quickly. We have observed phenomena that require immediate discussion." Zarathes took her position at the table, acutely aware that her bioluminescent patterns were still active and visible to everyone present. Marcus sat beside her, closer than diplomatic protocol would normally suggest, but she found his presence comforting rather than concerning. "What phenomena are you referring to?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the racing of her hearts. "We have detected what we can only describe as consciousness resonance patterns between the two of you," the Scorvani replied. "These patterns are unlike anything we have observed before in individual consciousness species. They suggest a form of mental and emotional synchronization that approaches but does not replicate collective consciousness integration." Ambassador Kithalo leaned forward, her skin patterns shifting to the bright yellow of intense interest. "Are you saying they've formed some kind of psychic bond?" "Not psychic in the conventional sense," the Scorvani clarified, "but their neural activity, emotional responses, and even their biorhythmic patterns have begun to synchronize in ways that suggest deep integration. This morning, their consciousness patterns were distinctly individual. Now, they appear to be operating as a complementary dyad. Marcus cleared his throat. And this is significant because, the Scorvani continued, all three figures turning to look at him with their unsettling black eyes, it represents a form of voluntary consciousness expansion that we have never observed in individual mind species. You have achieved a limited form of collective awareness while retaining your individual identities. This has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness itself. Zarathus felt her skin patterns shift to deeper blues as she realized what the Scorvani were saying. You're suggesting that our connection has changed us in ways that might be scientifically significant? We are suggesting that your connection has created a new form of consciousness that bridges the gap between individual and collective awareness. And if this can be achieved between two individuals from different species, the implications for interspecies cooperation and understanding are staggering. Ambassador Kythalo's harmonic humming grew more pronounced. Dr. Chen. Commander Zarathus, I think what our Scorvani colleagues are trying to say is that your relationship isn't just personally significant. It might represent an evolutionary breakthrough in consciousness development. Marcus looked at Zarathus, and she could see her own mixture of wonder and concern reflected in his eyes. Are you saying that by falling in love we've accidentally solved the fundamental problem of interspecies understanding? Love, the Scorvani repeated, the word seeming to resonate through all three of their voices simultaneously. Yes, we had not considered this variable in our analysis. The emotional component you call love appears to be the catalyst that enables voluntary consciousness integration without loss of individual identity. This is remarkable, Ambassador Kythalo said, rising from her seat and beginning to pace in the flowing manner characteristic of her people. If love can create the kind of understanding and synchronization you're describing, then perhaps the key to lasting peace between species isn't political or economic cooperation, it's emotional connection. Zarathus felt a surge of something that might have been hope or terror. Are you suggesting that interspecies romantic relationships should be encouraged as a form of diplomacy? We are suggesting, the Scorvani replied, that what you and Dr. Chen have achieved together represents a new model for interspecies interaction, one based not on treaties or trade agreements, but on genuine emotional and psychological integration. Marcus stood and moved to the large viewport that dominated one wall of the conference room. The stars outside were steady and bright, unchanged by the momentous conversation taking place within the ship, but somehow they seemed different to Zarathus now, less distant, more connected. There's something beautiful about that idea, he said quietly, but also something dangerous. Love can't be mandated or programmed or used as a diplomatic tool. It has to develop naturally between individuals who choose each other freely. Of course, Ambassador Kythalo agreed. But what if we created opportunities for that natural development? What if the Consciousness Collaboration Initiative included not just scientific and cultural exchanges, but personal ones? What if we actively encouraged individuals from our three species to form friendships, partnerships, and yes, romantic relationships? The Scorvani's synchronized breathing paused momentarily. This approach would require careful consideration. Love, as we understand it from observing individual consciousness species, is unpredictable and often irrational. It could create complications as easily as it could solve problems, but it could also create understanding that goes deeper than any formal agreement, Zarathus said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Marcus and I have learned more about each other's species in the past few days than most diplomats learn in years of formal negotiations. And it's specifically because we allowed ourselves to become emotionally invested in each other's well-being. Marcus returned to the table and sat beside her again. Zarathus is right. When you care about someone personally, really care about them, you naturally want to understand their perspective, their culture, their way of seeing the universe. You become motivated to bridge differences rather than simply manage them. And the consciousness resonance patterns we observe between you support this hypothesis, the Scorvani added. Your neural synchronization appears to be strongest when you are focused on each other's emotional states and well-being. This suggests that love may indeed be a more powerful force for interspecies understanding than we previously calculated. Ambassador Kithalos stopped pacing and returned to her seat, her skin patterns now showing the steady green of deep thoughtfulness. Dr. Chen, Commander Zarathus, would you be willing to serve as a case study for this new approach? To document your relationship and its effects on your respective understanding of each other's species? Zarathus looked at Marcus, and in that moment she felt the strange synchronization the Scorvani had described. Without words, she knew that he was thinking the same thing she was, that their relationship had already moved far beyond the personal into something with potentially galactic significance. "We would be honored," Marcus said, "but with conditions." "What conditions?" the Scorvani asked. "First, our privacy must be respected. We're willing to share insights about how interspecies relationships develop and what we learn from each other, but the intimate details of our personal connection remain ours alone."
Agreed, Ambassador Kithalos said immediately.
"Second, this can't become a propaganda exercise. If other individuals from our species choose to form relationships, it has to be their choice, made freely and without pressure from their governments or communities." "Also agreed," the Scorvani replied. "And third," Zarathus added, "any formal agreement we reach here has to be based on its own merits, not on the existence of our relationship. Marcus and I may have discovered something important about interspecies connection, but that doesn't mean our personal bond should be the foundation for political treaties." "Wise conditions," Ambassador Kithalos acknowledged, "and I believe we can work within them." Over the next several hours, the three delegations worked together to revise the Consciousness Collaboration Initiative, incorporating the new insights about emotional connection and its role in interspecies understanding. The agreement that emerged was unlike any treaty in galactic history. Instead of focusing primarily on territorial boundaries and resource allocation, it emphasized cultural exchange, personal relationships, and the development of what they began calling emotional diplomacy. The Scorvani would establish research stations in joint territories where individuals from all three species could live and work together for extended periods. The Threnodai would coordinate cultural exchange programs designed to help individuals from different species understand each other's social customs and values. The Calarians would provide security and logistical support, ensuring that these experimental communities remained safe and functional. But perhaps most importantly, the agreement formally recognized that interspecies relationships, friendships, partnerships, and romantic bonds were not just acceptable but actively beneficial for galactic peace and understanding. As the formal signing ceremony concluded and the various delegations began to disperse, Zarathus found herself alone with Marcus in the conference room. The stars outside seemed brighter than ever, and she realized that they were no longer just points of light in the darkness. They were suns around which countless worlds orbited, worlds where beings like themselves might one day form connections that transcended the boundaries of species and biology. "Marcus," she said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport, "do you think we've done the right thing? DICA? Making our relationship part of something this significant?" She mocked the idea of kissing humans. Then one changed everything. HFY Sci-Fi Romance. Best HFY Stories.